Namaste.
Namaste, Rupa. How are you?
Very good.
It's good to see you.
Very good to see you.
Well, a nice spring day out here.
It is. It's nice 55 to 60 degrees outside. It was, as I was walking here, I was like looking at the cherry blossoms, and that's one of the most favorite things about living in Jersey City at this point in time, is
Yes.
the cherry blossoms. But here we are, talking about a very interesting topic today,
Yes.
the concept of what comes for free.
What comes from free? It's the expiration is actually called nickel and diming yoga. What is the cost of eternal wisdom? And this is probably, I know I've written about a lot of subjects that you thought like were going to be kind of like really triggering to people. I think this is the hardest subject I've had to write about.
So I have a couple of very visceral reactions, which is, first I was very surprised to hear that this is a difficult topic for you. And why I was reflecting on this on the way here, and I don't go to the car mechanic and ask them to fix my car for a discount or for free. I don't remember the last time I walked up to a grocery store and asked them to give me those bananas for half the price.
Yeah.
So why do we expect certain things to be discounted or to come for free? Like, why do we go into certain relationships and certain trades and crafts,
Right.
just like yoga, and think that we can set a price, as opposed to there just being a price for that exchange?
Right. Well, it's interesting because this whole essay came out of an online kind of argument I got into with Susanna Martakaki, who's a pretty well-known, influential yoga teacher now. And she had posted something, and this was only a couple of months ago, that people shouldn't support yoga studios that were not operating on discounts and sliding scales and free classes. And post-pandemic, I had a very negative response to that because so many yoga studios closed down, so many businesses closed down, so many people just gave up. And right now, I thought it was a terrible time to promote this idea of free and discount classes to make yoga more accessible, when yoga has never been more accessible in the history of yoga, at the cost of small business. And so I decided to really look deep into the Puranic storytelling and say, where does this concept of like free yoga come from? Like, who is it part of the tradition at all, or is it something that's just coming from our culture now that's totally capitalistic and like competitive?
And what did you discover?
Well, when you look back at the Puranic teachings, one of the best stories is about Krishna. And we come back to Krishna. We always come back to Krishna, right? He's got good stories. And Krishna, growing up as a young boy, had a teacher, a guru, and his guru is named Sandipani. And he spent time teaching Krishna the esoteric teachings of yoga. And back in those days, when you went to your teacher, the teacher didn't actually, like today, when people come to us, like we tell them the price as soon as they come through the door. Back in the old days, you would come to a teacher and sit down with the teacher, and you would get the teachings, and the teacher would transmit these teachings, and then the student would say, what is the price for these teachings? And the teacher would then, based upon what the intake of the student was, they would set a price. So Krishna received all the teachings, and he asked Sandipani, what is the cost of the teachings? And there's two different stories. Like the Puranas sometimes have more than one story. One story is that that Sandipani had a son who was kidnapped by an asura, or what we may call a demon. And that he wanted Krishna to rescue the sun. But the better story is that Sandipada had a son who died, and it had left his wife in grief-stricken, that she had lost this only child of theirs, and that the relationship between the guru and his wife had really soured because of the loss of the son. And so when Krishna says, what is the cost of the teachings, Sandipada tells him, he asked him, he said, I'd like you to bring back my son from the dead. He said, can you resurrect my son? It will make my life very happy. And that's what Krishna does. He actually performs a miracle to receive the teachings of yoga. Like he performs this miraculous feat that we only hear of Jesus Christ performing, right? And so in a way, that is telling us that the teachings of yoga are priceless. You can't, that you should be willing to do anything to receive these teachings, include perform a miracle. Also, when you look at the Ramayana, Vashishta is Ram's teacher, and after Ram receives his teachings, Ram asks Vashishta, "What is the price of these teachings?" And Vashishta has a different answer. Vashishta says that he expects Ram to be a good, honorable king. So he doesn't ask for actually a personal energy exchange, but he asks for an energy exchange of Ram acknowledging his people, of performing his duties with Dharma and acknowledging his Dharma. So nothing, it was free. And in the case of both of these people, Ram and Krishna, they don't haggle, they don't argue about the price, they don't roll their eyes. They don't say, well, I really wish I'd like all in to pay, maybe I can bring back, half of your son, or like something like that. He does what's asked of him.
So there's two things that come up for the story, which is that the act of teaching and the act of receiving teachings is part of a sacred contract.
Yes.
Of give and take. The teacher gives, but the teacher also receives something in exchange. There's obviously the satisfaction of having a good student who transmits forward the teachings that have been taught, but also
Yes.
there is the other aspect of it, which is what am I giving you as a teacher so you can continue to sustain and teach.
Yes.
And we're talking about ancient times where there was a support system in a society where teachers were taken care of in a certain way. There was a roof over their head, there was society that paid for it, there was perhaps patronage even from royalty. Right? We now work in an economy. This is an economy, this is a marketplace.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, for you to keep your lights on, for you and Bobby to keep the studio lights on, for you to be able to pay your teachers, the sustainability of running a business is as much a part of the sacred exchange, actually.
Yes.
For us to come in here and sit and receive teachings, we also have to be part of the community of keeping the lights on.
Yes.
Not just of the studio, of the local businesses, and such that every teacher that passes through the studio, you are able to pay them an equitable wage.
Oh, equitable wage. And so that becomes the energy exchange for the teachings of yoga is money. And when we look at a lot of times I hear yogis all the time talk about how dirty money is, or that money is a bad thing. That has never been part of the tradition either. In the Indian tradition, money is Lakshmi.
It's a sacred
It's sacred. It's holy, and everybody deserves Lakshmi. There aren't some people who could say, well, that they're not deserving of Lakshmi. So everybody wants to have the goddess of fortune and wealth and prosperity in their lives. And that's really the tradition of India. When we look at the idea that money is dirty and that spiritual teaching should be for free, this is a complete Christian concept. Jesus Christ was ministered for free. His teachings were always free. And Christianity was one of the first biggest colonizers. When we talk about colonization, we always think of the British Empire or maybe the Portuguese or the Spanish or the English. But in reality, Christianity was the first colonizer. They would go into communities. They would decimate any other spiritual tradition, whether it was pagan. Even today, Hinduism is being attacked by Christians in India every day. And so this idea of free ministry worked for them because all of a sudden
They were getting something else in exchange.
yeah, they got
It was
everything.
invisible.
It was invisible.
It was a power dynamic.
And it was a power dynamic. And then once you had that power dynamic set up and you said, oh, you can only tithe what you want, then you're the only person being tithed to. You're the only person getting money. The money isn't being divided up between 20 or 30 different lineages or ideas of spirituality. So Christianity not only colonized, but then it decimated other spiritual teachings, so it was in power. And the idea of free ministry comes out of Christianity. Unfortunately, I think whether it's Western students or it's students from other countries, they've been so influenced by Christianity that they think that all spiritual ministry is for free in other traditions. Then I think you're dealing with the problem of capitalism, that we're teaching yoga and spirituality in a competitive market, in a market where, like you said, ashrams, I don't know of many ashrams that have like patronage that's keeping the property taxes paid for and the lights on and electricity going through the place and water on. So any yoga shala that's operating in America has a commercial contract with a landlord
And a lease.
and is paying commercial taxes and is paying even pension and welfare or employee taxes if they have employees. So you have this idea of that it's this spiritual tradition that is giving, but you're working in a capitalist system that is constantly taking.
Yeah, and I think that going back to certain professions have been very good at establishing a baseline rate by which if you are a professional within the profession, you are going to be paid a certain amount of income. I think law, medicine, your plumber, your electrician, all of these are regulated at some level of pricing, right? And I work a lot with the arts, as you know, and I am so appalled at how underpaid the arts are and how underfunded they are. And it's not very dissimilar from yoga, which is that somehow we have gone out there and said we've pledged services and creative capital and spirit ours, what you're offering for free.
Yes.
It's a different story when you want to give something for free, which is you come to me and I'm doing a service for you and I'm like, Austin, this is my gift to you. That is a very voluntary give back of something.
Yes.
But you coming to me and expecting me to give you something for free, it's actually entitlement.
Yeah, and you can also look at it as a business owner, from a business owner's perspective. You and I have a mutual friend who owns a restaurant. I go to his restaurant once a week. He does South Indian cuisine. Yeah. It's wonderful. Our friend is always once in a while bringing over a set of appetizers that weren't
for free.
That's his gift. That's his gift. But I am a patron of his business weekly. Weekly, I am there at his establishment, and through the pandemic, I supported him too. So there's a mutual exchange going back, one of saying, I appreciate you coming and supporting my business. Here's something to let you know that I appreciate that. That's a very different thing from me walking into his restaurant and sitting down and saying, I want my first dosa for free, and if I like it, I'll come back.
Yes.
That's a very different thing.
And that becomes a very, that to me seems it would reminds me of entitlement, and the darker side of it is the very extortionary and the extractive nature of capitalism as such.
Yeah.
Right, and the whole idea of showing up to a spiritual practice is that there's reciprocity in the exchange, and you're giving back to the community. And giving back to the community also involves kind of being part of the sustainability of
the community.
Of the community.
The sustainability. And the way that there's sustainability in our culture is through money. That is what
That
sustains.
is the currency of the world.
Yes. And it's not, and it's no, I can't, no longer are we living in the good old days where you could say to students, well, I need you to sweep the floor, and I need you to go clean the toilet, and I need you to go downstairs and clean the windows. Now they all would look at you and go, what are you talking about? I'm not doing that. So there has to be an exchange.
And also I would say that, and I think I gave you the example of my own personal experience. I have resigned from office work for about 4 to 5 years now, and I've voluntarily signed up to do a whole bunch of things for free. But even for someone that has voluntarily signed up to do a whole bunch of things for free, believe me, it adds up in terms of burnout. Why? Because you fundamentally have disconnected yourself from a certain currency and a certain flow of this world. And it just brings me back again and again to thinking about women that just kind of caretake and take care of a house, feed their kids, feed their spouses, and their contributions are for free. You're not paid. I mean,
yes.
We know this.
Yes, and I think that that's another thing to talk about. Like, where does this idea of free yoga in the West come from? When you look at the statistics of the number of yoga teachers and yoga business owners that actually that own businesses or are teaching, the majority are women. And so it's all, and the majority of the people who practice yoga are women. So a lot of times these are women doing this to other women, devaluing other women's work. And, as far as the arts go, I was in the arts for years. I was a costume designer. Either gay men do it or women do it. And so you have this constant repetition happening of certain things being devalued because of their association with gender or sexuality. And I see that constantly in yoga. Constantly in yoga. If yoga had been a practice picked up in the West by men, you would have never had the idea of discounted yoga. Ever. Men would have paid whatever the price was to go to a yoga class, just like they do to
go to the barber, go to the gym,
or like CrossFit. I mean,
Yeah.
you never hear about people feeling that they need to give one free CrossFit class for free. So you have Christianity, you have capitalism, and then you have the gender gap all kind of colliding in on the idea of yoga and the teachings of yoga in the West. And it becomes incredibly problematic.
I think that we, on one hand, while if you sat here and you told me that give me $1,000 and I'll show you the golden way to enlightenment, that's the shadow side of it, because we know that there's a bunch of con artistry around this as well.
Yes.
Very expensive, like celebrity practitioners offering the path to enlightenment for thousands of dollars. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is that at the basis of the exchange is the concept that this is as much a transmission of a spiritual practice as it is a craft, it is a trade, and it is the way that someone actually pays their bills and keeps their lights on.
Yeah.
So, and that is the reciprocity of there's a give and take of this.
Yes. Yes. And when we talk, like I said, when we talk about also the accessibility of yoga, never in the history of yoga has there been so much accessibility to yoga, because as soon as the internet became available, what did yogis do? They started putting on like free classes to promote themselves on YouTube. I mean, I can go and listen to lecture after lecture with Sadhguru and never actually pay for any of his teachings, because he puts them out there to promote himself.
Yeah, but when Sadhguru shows up for a live event, there is entrance fees to that live event.
Yes, because you are now with him live.
You're with him live.
And that has to be a value. That you and I are in the space together, and I'm actually energetically able to like interact with you. That is of great value.
There is. And the other thing is also, it's reminding me, Austin, which is that in India you have this beautiful tradition of a Guru Dakshina.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, while it's not mandated that I pay the Guru a certain amount of money, it almost always is this beautiful act of appreciation where the Guru does leave a suggested range, and depending on where the pupil is in terms of what they're able to pay, you know, there's an exchange that happens there. But again, it happens in this beautiful tradition of respect for what has been given.
Yes.
And appreciation for what has been given. And what do you think of that?
Well, I think it's I perform Guru Dakshin with my guru, Yoga Sri Sudarshan Kanan. And it takes place always on like I think it's the full moon or the harvest moon, or it's like it has a moon cycle to it. And you know, last year when he performed Guru Dakshin, he talked about how that because we had all been doing this over the internet, that he was asking people to pay what they felt capable of paying because of the pandemic. It was very interesting. He said something. He said, but if we were together in person, or he said, I was teaching you one-on-one, I would actually tell you what the fee is. He said, but now that there's this kind of camera and screen between us, I'm allowing you to just give what you feel like this is the value that I brought to you this year in the teachings. And you know, I still wrote a pretty big check, you know, because why? I know that without me writing a check, that he has no income in India, because this is all he does. He only does spiritual teachings. He doesn't have a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
So I know that his family and everybody else around him depends on what his students are willing to offer. And I think that's a very precarious lifestyle, to always depend on what the kindness of strangers and the giant. Yes, it's like it's very precarious. And so you know, I think that it's an important tradition. I wish that, you know, we could actually have something like that in the West, where we actually have an event where we can actually say thank you to the people who bring you these teachings, on whatever level they are. Whether it's a hot yoga studio or it's a studio that is like ours, that focuses more on yoga at its traditional level.
What about, you had an interesting thing as well to say about Sanatana Dharma. So do you, this idea of what Devdutt had also mentioned to you?
So my friend and teacher Devdutt, like, you know, and he's a good friend of ours. Like one time I was asking him about because I went to him to get this source of where is this free yoga thing coming from? And Devdutt said, you know, that in the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, or Hinduism, if you want to call it that, he said, you know, there's nothing that the tradition teaches you about your debt. That there you have debt to your parents, that you have debt to your family, you have debt to your country, you have debt to your community, you have debt to your teachers, and finally you have debt to God. And he went on to say, he said, God is a bookkeeper in this tradition. God is not a judge of sin. He is a bookkeeper, and you have debt to pay. And he said, yoga teaches you to pay your debt and understand your debt to those you owe. And that's a very beautiful thing. What is the debt that I owe to somebody who is actually offering me these teachings?
It's a sacred contract.
Offers me a satsang or community That's important to recognize, especially in times like now, where so many of those communities and satsangs have been decimated because of this pandemic that we've experienced. So, and moving forward, it's hard to get people back to the satsang. It's not easy to get people to come back after they've been away for anywhere from 2 years, a year and a half, right? So anybody promoting this idea of free yoga or discounted yoga or yoga at sliding scales, I think now is a good time for a reset button and ask yourself, where does this idea come from? And who does it really benefit? Does it benefit any of us? Does it benefit the student in understanding the value of the teachings? Does it benefit the teacher who is bringing those teachings? Does it benefit the employer who is employing the teacher who is bringing you those teachings? And my answer would be no. It's not benefiting anybody but one person who's promoting her brand. And she's doing that at the cost of everybody else. She's doing that so that she in a capitalistic society can undermine the competition. And that makes me angry. But angry in a yogic way. Let's have an honest conversation about this issue. Not just like be angry and be angry. Like, let's have an honest, real intellectual conversation about where this concept comes from. And does it really help any of us?
What does your asking for free come at the expense of? What is the balance or the imbalance that it sustains and promotes?
Yes.
And where do we create inequities? It's really inevitably a race to the bottom.
A race to the bottom. It's a race to the bottom. And in reality, it hurts those people who are the most passionate about the subject.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you, Narupa. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
To more sacred contracts and keeping the circle of balance giving and receiving alive.
Giving and receiving.
And to giving with great joy and to receiving with great joy and with great equanimity.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You want to sing Lokana?
Yeah.
We're going to chant Lokana again one more time. Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Namaste.
Namaste.